I often advocate that women should be lifting weights, especially women over the age of 40, 50, and beyond. And this is because of the accelerated muscle loss we begin to experience, particularly in our 40s. And this accelerates again in our 50s when we lose the protection of estrogen, and then also we lose testosterone, making it difficult to build muscle and retain muscle. Today, we're going to focus on 5 strategies that will help you to tone and sculpt your body safely, regardless of whether or not you're a beginner or you're somebody who is seasoned to weights and you lift frequently. Hi, my name is Carol Covino. I'm an online health and fitness coach for women who are nearing the age of 50 who are experiencing problems with weight loss, gaining body fat, especially in the midsection, and building muscle. I help these women to lose the body fat for good and to tone and strengthen their bodies. Let's get into the show. I'm going to be giving you 5 techniques that you can incorporate regardless of where you're at on your weight training journey. We're going to focus specifically on strength training today. I'm going to touch a little bit on cardio as it pertains to goals. So, first of all, and you may have heard me speak about this on my Facebook Lives and also here on the podcast, is the first concept that we need to understand is progressive overload. And we'll actually be coming back to this a few times in the podcast on how to incorporate this, how to do this, because I see this as a concept that is widely misunderstood, particularly by women who they're not in the bodybuilding community, they're maybe new to weights or an intermediate level. They don't understand the importance of progressive overload, nor do they understand how to safely incorporate this. So, progressive overload is just like it sounds. It is a progression in either how heavy we're lifting, so the weights that we're actually picking up. It could be a progression in technique, so using some different techniques that are a little bit more advanced or put more stress on the muscle, forcing an adaptation, which I'll talk about what I mean by adaptation in a moment. So it can be volume with sets, with reps, how often we train. There are a few different ways to do this. Time under tension, which is one of my favorite, which is really finding the sweet spot on a weightlifting move where you're keeping the tension on and you're not concentrating so much on the actual weight that you're lifting, but the tension that you're placing your muscles under. So the main factor in progressive overload is intensity. You're increasing the intensity. Now, obviously, if you're a beginner, you need to develop good form. So you need to work on proper form and safety, getting familiar with the movements before you start to incorporate this. If you have never weight trained before, I highly suggest that you hire a professional. You hire a personal trainer or a coach to help you with this, somebody who can look at your form and make suggestions. Now, when hiring a personal trainer, I don't believe in going up to the front desk and just requesting any personal trainer. It's important that this be a good match for your goals. Not every personal trainer works with beginners. Some work with power lifters, bodybuilders, more advanced athletes. Some personal trainers work with an older population, a more mature population. Some work with very young, even teenagers that are doing sports. So it's important to get the trainer who is right for your goals and for your fitness level. I suggest if you belong to a gym and you're able to watch the styles of the different trainers, that is something I would suggest doing. Watching how they interact with the clients, the type of workouts, and the type of clientele that they're working with. So often at my gym, I will see trainers who work more often with adults over the age of 60 or 65. I'll see other trainers that are working more with younger men or younger women. So check out who they're working with and then their style of training, how attentive they are to that client, how attentive they are to safety measures, and then how appropriate those exercises seem to be for that individual. So, for instance, I was traveling and I watched a very young personal trainer taking an older woman. By older, I mean she was probably in her mid to late 70s, through some exercise moves that I found questionable. She was doing barbell deadlifts. Now, I'm not saying a woman in her 70s cannot do barbell deadlifts. I know plenty of them who can do so safely. However, this woman, it was very clear, was brand new to exercise and did not have the muscle development or the skills or the range of motion to do this deadlift safely and correctly. And the trainer was not offering the cues. Basically, the trainer was just giving her the barbell, telling her, do the deadlift, demonstrated it once, and he really wasn't paying attention to how good the form was, how she was actually executing the exercise. So that would be an example where I observed somebody that maybe should not have worked with that population. Perhaps this person would be better working with somebody, a male who is younger or more athletic, or a female who is younger and more athletic. So progressive overload, once again, you can do this by increasing weight slowly and safely. You can do this by increasing repetitions, by sets. That's called volume. So we're just doing more of the exercise. So it could be a little lighter weight with more repetition, the time under tension. Isometric holds can be part of that time under tension. And then certain training techniques such as supersets and trisets. That's where you're combining two or more exercises together and you're not resting in between the exercises. So an example of this would be overhead press, shoulder press, dumbbell press with a dumbbell lateral raise, which is a side lateral raise. So performing those two exercises together, let's say you're doing 12 reps of each one, you would not rest in between the two. So you would do 12 overhead, 12 lateral, then you would rest for roughly about 60 seconds. It just depends on the amount of weight you're lifting. And then you would repeat that set again. That's a way of bumping up the intensity without actually increasing weight. As a woman who is 61 years old, I have to say there is a limit to increasing weight. There is just a point where it is too much on my joints, my ligaments, my lower back, and I have to begin to rely on other methods. I have some severe disc issues starting at L3, L4, L4, L5. Basically, those discs have ruptured. And if I'm not careful, what winds up is the ruptured disc begins touching the nerve controlling my left leg. I get severe sciatica, so severe that I cannot walk. So this means that I have to find other methods. I cannot go to failure by lifting more weight on a squat or a leg press, for instance. I have to rely on other methods, but I can still find ways for progressive overload. In my opinion, from having trained over 1,000 women at this point and having worked in the personal training field 4 years teaching group fitness, corporate classes, that there is a point, as I said, where increasing this weight can be detrimental. So what you want to do is have periods of time where you back off. It's usually called a deload week. And typically, if my clients are doing a new program, they're given a new weight training program every 4 weeks. I expect the first week to be a deload week. It is a week where they're getting accustomed to the exercises. They're not trying to set their biggest PR, personal record, or lift their heaviest weight. They're simply getting used to the new exercise routine. Even if many of those exercises are ones they have done prior. They still need that time to adjust to the new way that I've put the program together as far as the order I've put things in, the supersets, the circuit training, if they have any circuit training, things like that, or even versions of the exercises. Sometimes, for example, I'll have them do a different version of a squat or of a deadlift or a lunge that they've not done prior. So they need some time. So that's a deload week. Then from there, they can progress in that program for the next 3 weeks, bumping up the intensity with each passing week. And then at the start of the next month, they have a brand new program with that deload. That, in my opinion, having worked with so many different people, really not just women. When I personal trained, I worked with men and women. So having that experience of observing people in different situations, I have just found that having that deload, a time where they're not going as hard, is essential for progress and for staying safe. Number 2 is going to be frequency and volume. And I touched on this already. This is part of the progressive overload. So with frequency and volume, what I'm talking about is how often your weight training. So that would be first and foremost. Are you weight training 2 times a week, 3, 4, 5? Next up is the frequency of the muscle group you're working. So are you working shoulders twice a week? Are you working legs twice a week? Glutes 3 times a week? And then volume are your sets and your reps. So for hypertrophy, and that is muscle growth, it's just a fancy word for muscle growth. It's used in the bodybuilding community, and growth and development, I should say. So not just size, but the actual development of the muscle. You want to be doing 10 to 20 sets for the muscle group per week. Now, that doesn't mean 20 sets all in one setting. Like, for instance, if you're doing shoulders, I'm not necessarily saying that you do all 20 of those sets in one session. Perhaps it's divided up throughout the week, but you're basically hitting about 10 to 20 sets per muscle group. Now, for muscle groups that you really want to develop and that are lagging, you may need to take that number up above 20. But this is mostly applying to individuals who are more interested in bodybuilding. Now, when I say bodybuilding, I'm not always talking about competing. That's not what I mean. Not every bodybuilder competes. I know several bodybuilders at the gym. They're not professional bodybuilders, but they do this because they enjoy it and they want to see how far they can take their body, and they are doing it for usually aesthetic reasons. They want to look really great come summer. They want to have that muscle development, that V taper for the men, that more hourglass shape for the women. So when I say bodybuilding, I'm simply referring to somebody who is interested in developing their body in that manner. So their goal is hypertrophy. They're not a power lifter. That's an entirely different thing. I have often had people confuse that with me. I remember a gentleman coming up and asking me how, what my 1 rep max on my chest press and how much could I bench press and how much could I squat. And that really wasn't my goal to get to this huge PR with how much I could lift for 1 rep. I wasn't a power lifter. I was doing this with bodybuilding principles in mind, not powerlifting principles. And neither is right or wrong. It's just based on your goals, which we're going to get to the goals in a moment. Next up, number 3 is to be specific. If you want to progress, you've got to have a focus. It is not going to happen by osmosis. We can't simply say, I'm going to go to the gym X times per week and I just want to look better. Now, maybe you just want to look better. That's fine. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that goal, but it's not specific enough if you really want to progress. And I'm going to get more into the goal aspect of this because it is so important to be honest with yourself here. But if you want progress, you've got to be specific. So I have so many women say, I want your shoulders. Well, I am doing many times 30 sets plus per week to get my shoulders. That's what it takes for me. Now, it might be less for someone else. I'm 61. I have to put a lot of effort in to have the shoulders that I do. It's a lot of volume and there's some frequency there. I'm training them a couple of times a week, and then I'm also hitting them indirectly, which we're going to talk about what that means. There's a way to hit muscles directly and muscles indirectly. So the question lies, do you really want to do 30 plus sets a week to get Carol's shoulders when you're 55 or whatever age you are? And that's fine. If you don't, it's fine if you do. It's just understanding that if you have a goal, that you have to be specific with that goal. And that brings us to number 4, which is know the goal. Now, when I was a marathon runner, I did not lift a lot of weight. I did some weight because I found that it increased my speed. I did some weight that was more of conditioning training on my legs. I did some training for my core because that was important when I was running a marathon and I was out there for 3 hours. I wanted my legs to have that conditioning. I wanted my core to have that conditioning. I did a little bit of upper body. But my focus was not on progressive overload at that time. My focus was on the running. And I felt that if I began to build these muscle groups, it was going to slow me down. I was going to run slower. So my focus was on how many times I was going out running and whether I was doing a long run, a shorter run, sprints, a distance run, whatever that was. That was the focus with a little bit of weight training in the background. So you must look at your goals. Is there a specific sport you're doing? I used to train a tennis player that competed at a pretty high level. He was in his 50s, but he had made it to this very, very high level in a league. I don't know a lot about tennis, but I was very cognizant of his training, that I wasn't giving him things that were going to uh, basically collide, for lack of a better word, with his goals out on the court. I knew that he needed a certain amount of flexibility and ability to move, where I didn't want to give him exercises that were going to make him tighter. I wanted him to be stronger, more powerful, but I didn't want to do anything that was going to hinder, that was the word I was looking for, hinder his progress in these leagues. I have a woman also right now who plays tennis at a pretty high level, and I'm cognizant of that with her training. I'm constantly thinking, what does she need on the court? So this has to play into it. Obviously, I am not going to give her 5 strength training days or 4 strength training days. She needs room for that tennis, and so she needs enough strength training for a woman over 50 to build that muscle. She needs that bone density and strength, but she also enjoys tennis, so she needs to be effective at that. So we can't just go into the gym and start something we've seen on YouTube or Instagram. And yeah, it may be fine. It may be a fun weight training program, but I call this the YouTube spectacular, where you just Google something, and I see people do this, go into the gym and repeat it, and they're never ever asking, what actually is my goal? And people have different goals. Some people want to grow their glutes. They're, bikini athlete, they are focused on their shoulders and their glutes. That is a goal for them. So they're not going to go out and run 10 miles every day and give themselves a flat butt. They got to be realistic about what they want to achieve. So, something I would ask you to do, even if you're a newbie to this, is to write down a very specific goal. Now, let's talk about people that don't really like to exercise. And I trained people like this. I actually trained a woman, and it was so funny because we were in the middle of a session, and I've been training her about 5 years, and she said, Carol, I don't think you get it. I really don't like lifting weights. I don't like exercising. She actually did like exercising. She was very into hiking and running and some of the distance activities, some more of the endurance activities. She just really wasn't like going into the gym and lifting the weights, but she never would miss her sessions. She knew it was important So what did I do to keep her with me for 5 years if she didn't like that? Because I mean, it couldn't all be just wanting to hang out with me, right? There had to be something else. So what it was the sessions were short. So when we sat down together and began to talk, I told her, let's start with these 30-minute sessions, because initially she wanted like an hour session because at the time that was the more of the industry standard. This has been several years ago. And I said, let's just start with 30 minutes. We can get a lot done in 30 minutes, and you're in, you're out, you're on your day. And she was a little skeptical, but we agreed to it. And I trained her and actually like a little hiking group. And we did these 30-minute sessions so effective. I mean, many times we were doing 9 exercises in 30 minutes because I don't mess around, I don't stand around, we move. And it was good. It was good from an endurance point because that's what she needed and that's what these other individuals needed out on the hiking trails and running or whatever they were doing for distance. And it was good from a psychological, a mental perspective because she knew it was over in 30 minutes. It was done. And we'd chat a little bit and we'd laugh and boom, it was done. So if you know you are like that individual, I'm going to ask you to be very honest with yourself. Don't say, I'm going to go to the gym 5 days a week and work out an hour every single day when you know good and well that in the past that's been a sticking point, that you really, it's really not your thing. Now, some of you will say that now and you'll change your mind. You'll get bit by the bug and you will enjoy lifting weights. You'll enjoy being in the gym, or if you do your home gym, you'll enjoy that and you'll want to continue and do more. But some of you, like my client, will not. It will be 5 years later and you'll still feel the same about it. So be honest with yourself if that's you, but you also need to be honest here. It's not a pass to not lift weights. I'll say that again. Not wanting to exercise is not a pass to not lift weights or to not strength or resistance train. That is a non-negotiable. If you want to be an extraordinary 50-year-old, 60-year-old, 70-year-old, 80-year-old, you will need to do some form of consistent resistance training. Consistent is not, I did it 1 week and didn't do it 2. Now, we all have times we take off. We have, we have an injury, we're sick or overly tired, not sleeping. We all have times like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being overall consistent over time. And I know this, I've been doing this a very long time. I first really began to seriously lift in my late 40s and then took it to the next level in my early 50s. And I'm now 61. I've done this a long time. And I haven't gotten to where I've gotten by skipping, months at a time. The only time that I did was when I had my back injuries. I had to take time off there. That was a given. But overall, there's been that consistency. And I also haven't done it by being so regimented that I come to the gym with a training plan. And let's say I'm coming down with something, a cold or something, or I didn't sleep, and I push myself to lift a certain amount of weight, or I push myself to go through the routine. That's not good either. So consistency simply means being largely consistent over time, taking into account the bumps in the road that life can throw your way. So be honest with the goal. And if your goal is I really know I need to do this thing. Okay, Carol, I'm on board. I'm realizing that if I don't want to lose my strength, if I don't want to have high body fat, if I don't want to lose my bone density, if I don't want to lose my balance, then I need to be incorporating this exercise and specifically resistance training into my weekly routine. But how do I do that if I really don't want to do it? And you do it the same way I did with my client. 2 times per week, 30-minute session. Come on, what is 30 minutes out of your day? It astounds me when somebody says they don't have time. Do you have 20 minutes? Do you have 25 minutes? Do you have 30 minutes? You can resistance train in that length of time. Now, are you going to, with 2 days a week, get a bodybuilder physique? No, that's not going to happen. That takes things a little bit to a higher level, and it's not good or bad. It's once again based on goals. I, even if I don't compete, will continue with a bodybuilding lifestyle because I like it. I like how I look. I like how I feel. I like the challenge. I like being in the gym. So that's going to be a goal for me, at least at this point in my life. So be honest with what you really truly want for a goal. And if it's simply to have a certain level of strength, endurance, and fitness, but not to be at that higher level, then that's okay. Name it and claim it and then do it. Number 5, we're going to talk more extensively about, and this is something called RPE, excuse me, of perceived exertion. And you may have heard of this back in the days of aerobics and step aerobics and spin, and they might still have these charts up. I don't know. I haven't been to any of these classes in a very long time. But there would be charts up on ratings of perceived exertion, and they varied. Some of them were the old style, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Some of them had a 1 to 5 scale or a 1 to 10 scale. Some of them just had simply green, yellow, red for ratings of perceived exertion. So there's different versions of this. And basically, the idea was that you would monitor how hard you were working based on your own perception. So it's not based on heart rate or a watch or somebody else watching you. It was based on your own inward perception, how hard you're working. Do you feel you were working in the red? Do you feel you were working in the green or the yellow? Where did you feel you were at? Easy, hard, medium, in kind of maybe in between some of those zones. So this was very popular with cardiovascular exercise. The basic version of the RPE scale was called the Borg scale, and it was developed by a Swedish psychologist named Gunnar Borg, in the 1980s. And it measured the amount of strain and exertion and fatigue that you were experiencing while you were working, while you were doing the cardiovascular exercise. And as I said, it was mostly used with cardiovascular exercise. The scale at this time started with a level 6, and level 6 was considered minimal exertion, and it went all the way up to a 20, which would be max, like you can't go any higher. And then certain ratings were given labels. So a level 11 was classified as light, very light. A 17 was classified as very hard. The first version of the Borg scale worked pretty good, but there were some flaws, and you probably know what they are. Starting with a 6 is just a little weird. It's a little clunky. It's what I call clunky. It just feels somehow in our minds like a weird number to start with. I don't think of 6 as being light. I think of 6 as moderate because I'm thinking of a scale of 1 to 10. So it's a little hard in the human mind to quantify that. And then having 15 different levels that they would go through was just too many. I mean, going from 6 all the way to 20, it was just too many. Most people found it difficult to accurately judge their level of exertion. So the new version, let's talk about what that is looking like, and then we are going to apply it to weight training. So we're going to move away from the cardiovascular scenario of doing, say, running or rowing or whatever it is, and move into the weight training, resistance training version of this. So a rating of perceived exertion, an RPE of 10, is considered all out, maximum effort, nothing left in the tank. You cannot do one more rep. So conceivably, this is what we call failure. And you may have heard me talk about working to failure in prior podcast episodes. And I've actually adjusted my definition of this a bit. I used to say, just like it sounds, you cannot do one more rep, and that is taking it to failure. I believe that taking it to failure, we have to be very careful. First of all, most people find it hard to go to the failure point. Because obviously it's going to be such an uncomfortable and difficult point that most people find it hard. And many people underestimate it. They say they've gone to failure. I've done this. And it's not that they're lying. It's just kind of human nature where we don't bump it up. We just kind of stay right underneath that level. So that's why I've sort of changed my, I said my definition, not really my definition of failure, but how useful I believe it is for weight training. I find that this RPE method of gauging where you're at is better than just aiming for going to failure. And failure, there can also be a lot of injuries. People tend to overdo it. They go to failure on every single set. So once again, failure being you cannot perform another rep. So oftentimes their form is falling apart. They're at risk for an injury on that final rep because they've taken it so far. So this is my trouble with the whole idea of failure. I feel like we need to know what that is, that is that level 10. But for most of us, getting to that level consistently, you would not want to do that for every single workout, every single set. And there are different ways that you can still experience muscle gains without continually going to failure. So hopefully that made sense for you all, because I have gotten many, many questions on that where people asking, how do I know? And, earlier in the podcast, I did discuss my back issues. So doing a failure set on legs, unless it's leg extensions or hamstring curls, where those are more isolation moves and they're not compound moves, I'm not using multiple joints or muscle groups. I can't do it safely. I can't go to failure on a leg press or a squat. I'm going to blow my back out. So that's why I wanted to kind of put that little bit of a warning in there that yes, you want to be bringing the intensity. Yes, you want to be taking it up high, but you just really want to be cognizant of where you're at. So an RPE of 9 is very tough. It's a tough rep. And you have maybe 1 rep left in the tank. So it's close to that failure, not quite there. RPE 8 is 2 reps in reserve. So for most of my sets, I am in and around an 8. I feel like, okay, I could probably squeeze out 2 more, but maybe I'm going to start to use my back. Maybe my form's going to break up. Maybe I'm starting to feel just a little tiny twinge, like, maybe not go there. And so that's a place that I do many of my sets from is having that 2 reserve, like there's 2 in there. And it's actually really easy to tap into that. When you've been weight training for a while, let's say you get to 10, you know what that feeling is like of going, yeah, I could do 2 more, but it ain't going to be pretty. 7, RPE of a 7 is basically 3 reps in reserve. So between the set numbers, you can also have half increments. So for example, you could have a 9.5 would mean that you're at failure, but you could maybe do a partial rep. So let's say you're doing a shoulder press. You don't feel you can get a full one out, but you do this, you squeak out this little half rep, which I've done that before. 7.5 would be about 2 reps left, maybe 3, so you're kind of in the middle. So to get stronger and to cause enough damage and overload for an adaptation, we're back to that word, most of your training should be in the 7 to 9, and for me, it's usually the 7 to 8. There's a few things that I do a 9 on, and we're going to discuss which exercises where you can safely take it to the 9 and 10, because there's certain ones where you can safely do that more or less. There's always exceptions. And you can do it more safely than you can on other exercises. So adaptation, that is how we're changing our body. That is how we're developing our body. It is developing because we force an adaptation. This is why dancing around the room with the pink dumbbells, yeah, it's great if that's all you want to do and it's movement. I'm not going to say don't do it, but it is not going to get you the change you want because it's not forcing an adaptation. I watched a woman the other day. She's actually approached me before. This was at the gym. And she said, I don't know why I can't get my legs and my shoulders to change. And she was actually quite thin. She says, I can't see any muscle development. So we talked a little bit about protein, and she was not eating enough protein, and the diet need to be dialed in, or nutrition. But I watched her. I was on the treadmill, and I just look around the room, observe people, and I watched her, and she got on a shoulder press machine and took the pin where she took all the weight off. So the pin was just kind of dangling there. So basically, it was just lifting that top tiny little plate, which was couldn't have been more than 5 pounds. And the actual arms of the machine didn't have much weight. Some machines, the actual machine with no weight on it, the arms themselves, the machine themselves can have some weight. So sometimes a hack squat can be this way, especially when it's down on the shoulders where you feel the weight of the machine maybe is 40 pounds. And so some people start by not putting any weight on. That was not the case with this machine. I've done it many, many times. It's actually one where there's just no weight when you pick up those arms. It's just next to nothing. And so she had next to nothing with that and then barely put anything on. And now this is somebody who has been going to the gym for years, going to this gym for years. This exercise was not new to her. And to my knowledge, she had no shoulder issues. She just was not challenging. So there was no adaptation in the muscle. So when you challenge your muscle, your body in some way, your body needs to respond and it needs to adapt. I mean, this is part of why human beings survive. We adapt to different circumstances in our environment. So this adaptation was not occurring. The adaptation is what causes your body to change. You lift a little heavier weight and your body goes, oh, wow, might get a little sore, a little bit of a tear to the muscle. It repairs itself, coming back stronger, getting ready for the next time you throw that extra weight at it. It adapts. And you probably see this with needing to change your exercise routine if your body has adapted and you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. So that is really what you're doing when you're trying to change your body. Now, if your goal is simply to move, get fit, feel a little bit healthier, you don't really like lifting weights, you're probably not going to be pushing that adaptation response as much. You are just getting in there and doing the minimum. We're back to goals. It's understanding your goals. So to get stronger and to cause enough damage and overload to the muscle to get growth, to get an adaptation, you're in that 7, 8, sometimes 9 range. Now, going past 9 and up to 10 to failure can be extremely demanding on your central nervous system, your joints, your ligaments, your muscles, and even take away from your ability to recover. So failure sets you need more recovery from. That's why I say be careful with the notion of failure. Yes, we want intensity. Yes, we want to be taking it close. But do we need to go to failure all the time? No. And on certain exercises, no, we do not. Now, going too much below 7 is like dancing around with the pink dumbbells. It might not be enough. It might not force that adaptation. So that's why you'll mostly likely be 7 and 8. But there will be times when you start your working sets and you realize you're too light. I've done this. I'm like, Carol, what are you thinking? This is way too light. And I go ahead and I finish the set and then I bump up the intensity from there. So you can have those warm-up sets. I think warm-up sets are great. I don't do a formal warm-up. I actually do a couple of warm-up sets on the front side of every exercise that I'm doing. So for example, if it's a shoulder press, I'm going to be a couple of lighter 20 rep sets just to kind of warm up the muscles. Same with a leg press. So if you feel like you can knock out an extra 5 or 6 reps at the end of the set, that's either going to be your warm-up set or you're going to light. So in this instance, you're going to adjust your weight and you're going to adjust your reps as needed. Now, doing a certain weight just because your program says to do it, and I've seen this a lot. I see people walking around with their app or their notebook, and they're writing down whatever weight they did the last time, and they're wanting to match that or go above that. So they're wanting that progressive overload. But if you do that every time, you're not being realistic because we have days where we simply aren't as strong as others. I've experienced that where you eat at the gym some days and you feel like Superwoman and like you can do everything, all of the things. And then other days you're dragging. So you've got to recognize, is this a day I'm just not feeling well? I'm sore. The energy is in the tank. I'm dragging. You're going to need to adjust it down. So it's not always the best option to hold yourself to a certain type of workout or a certain amount of weight. By going slightly lighter one session, you're not going to lose a ton of strength, and you may recover better and use perfect technique during that time. So there are times where I concentrate solely on technique, and I don't think too much about the weight, and I may be even lifting significantly lower than what I normally do for that muscle group. So I do adjust this up and down, and like I talked about, having some times where you deload and do less is going to help your overall recovery. So let's go back to the RPE of 10, the rating of perceived exertion of 10. These should be reserved mostly for powerlifting competitions. Now, I know that I can say this with certainty that almost all of my audience, there may be one or two of you out there listening to this podcast, almost all of you are not doing powerlifting. I'm not doing powerlifting. Nothing wrong with it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm just saying my community on a whole, that's not who's listening to me. I'm not a powerlifter, so I'm not going to be the best person to follow for that. So the RPE of 10, those are the power lifters. Those are those ones doing that max 1 rep of a deadlift or a squat where they're just taking it to the absolute max. Or maybe just a few reps where they take it to the absolute max. Like, I don't know, I'm not a power lifter, but 3 reps where they go to their absolute max. Most of us are not there. So the RPE of 10, you really don't need to be incorporating. The potential neural, muscular, and joint stress is going to be high when you do an RPE of 10. But now, here is the exception. You are safer doing the RPE of 10 on isolation moves than on multi-joint compound movements. So a compound movement is going to be things like a chest press, a barbell chest press. It's going to be, or a dumbbell chest press. It's going to be things like a squat or a lunge. Typically, if you're going to an RPE of a 10 on a squat, the risk of injury is going to be very, very high because there's multiple joints and muscle groups involved. And in particular, your lower back, your spine can take quite a hit. Your central nervous system is just getting trashed if you're doing that with a squat. But if you're doing an isolation move like a barbell curl, it's going to be safer because it is an isolation move. There's not multiple joints. Now, you can still get a bicep tear, something you don't want. You still have to be safe, but you can push the gamut. You can push that RPE higher on an isolation move because it doesn't have the neural, the muscular, or the joint stress of these compound movements. So you may recover just fine doing an RPE 10 on sets for your biceps or your calves, even your delts. But once again, being careful because delts, shoulders are very prone to injury. The RPE of a 9, that's going to be around a third of your gym training if you have bodybuilding goals. Now, once again, I'm not talking competing bodybuilding. I'm talking about developing your body aesthetically. You have a certain way you want your glutes to look, your shoulders to look, your legs to look. So this is more of that hypertrophy goal. You want that muscle development. Then you're going to have a third of your gym training be around that. Maybe a little bit less if you are doing, you're doing exercises that are challenging, muscle groups that have had, you've had prior injuries in those muscles or joints or ligaments. So for instance, my back, I'm not doing an RPE of 9 on any kind of exercise with my legs other than, say, the leg extension, sometimes the hamstring curls. I can take it to that. Most of what you do is going to be that 7 to 8. So 8 would be another third of your workouts, especially in kind of the middle block. And then 7 is useful for higher risk exercises like squats, lunges, and bench presses. 5 and 6 RPE, that is going to be your warm up, or maybe a finisher. Like sometimes we do a little bit at the end if we have something left in the tank, or some type of speed work that you're doing. So an RPE 10, going back to this, is a rep that you almost completed with okay form. Almost completed with okay form. So it definitely breaks up. Like you started okay maybe, and then by the time you finish it, think of a bicep curl. You're starting that lift, but boy, you get about halfway up there and it's like, whoop, this is not happening. I can't get this curl to the top, or I can't control it well down to the bottom. Rule of thumb, and now this comes from Dr. Lane Norton. If you've not heard of him, you might want to check him out. He is a power lifter. He was a bodybuilding pro, and he is very knowledgeable in the field of exercise, strength training, and even nutrition. He says if your technique would not have counted in a powerlifting competition, now obviously he's a power lifter, or, this is better, you'd be embarrassed to have it up on YouTube. And I've had times like that where my husband is doing the video and I'm too fatigued and I go to do this rep and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's no way this is going up on YouTube. It's not going up on Instagram. It's not a reel. It's not anything, because this is embarrassing. So I took it too far. So if your technique would cause you embarrassment on social media, then you've gone past a 10. So I'll say that again. If the rep that you did, your technique, would be embarrassing, your form, your technique, if it were posted on YouTube, you've actually gone past your 10 rating. And Dr. Lane Norton says you probably were at a 12, where you don't want to be. Getting stronger, gaining muscle is about preventing injuries and employing consistency. It's more about those two things than anything, because the growth, the development, the strength, the hypertrophy, whatever your goal is, it's not going to happen if you're injured or if you cannot be consistent. And if you're injured, you can't be consistent. Like me with my back, I had to back off from all exercise, even walking, when my back was injured. So that injury took away my consistency forcefully. We don't want that to happen. So being aware of this RPE is a way of getting stronger, gaining muscle, and preventing not all injuries. They happen, but you can prevent a lot of them and stay more consistent. It's just a good way to progress without excessive injuries. So I hope this was helpful. Quick review is most of your workouts are going to be, for me, they're going to be 7, 8, occasionally some 9s, depending on the exercise. If it's an isolation exercise, you can push that closer up to the top of that RPE scale. But if you're doing a multi-joint compound exercise, walking lunges, reverse lunges, squats of all different kinds, deadlifts, you are not going to want to be doing 9-10 on these movements unless you're a power lifter. And like I said, I don't think that's the majority of you. So the things again, number one, progressive overload, and that doesn't always mean failure. You can get close to that, and then picking what exercises you get close to it with, whether it's isolation to be safer, and going a little bit lower on your RPE with your compound. Number two is frequency and volume. If you want to grow a certain muscle group like glutes, you're going to need to train them more often. You're going to need at least 10 to 20 sets per week for that muscle group. Being specific and focused. Meeting your goals does not happen from an arbitrary place. And why we as human beings think that's going to happen, I don't know. We're all guilty of it. But whether our goal is a business goal, an education goal, a spiritual goal, a physical health fitness goal, it has to be done from a place of intention. Just a quick little story. I was in a group meeting. I belong to a group run by Tiffany Bymaster, Coach Tiffany. LCB Insiders is what it's called, Lights Camera Branding. And I've been with her for, oh goodness, a couple of years now, but we meet once a month and it's almost like an ongoing mastermind where we have hot seats and we bring in our issues. And this is all business related. So we bring in our issues for our online business, and it's not just fitness. There's all different businesses in the Zoom calls. And she walks us through different scenarios and things we could do better. And we get feedback from her. We might get some feedback from the other people in the group. But she asked us yesterday in the meeting, what is your word for the year? And she said it can change, but right now in January 2023, what is your word for the year? And mine was to be intentional, because I realized that many times I am making decisions, major decisions, particularly for my business. I don't have this issue with my health or fitness, but it was with my business where I would just make a decision because I would see someone else doing it and think, I got to do that thing. And I had no intention behind it. I had no strategy. I had no reason for it. So it was kind of arbitrary. And so for me, it was to be intentional. I pray about things. I'm making it a habit to pray about my goals, to write them down, to think before I decide rather than jumping in intentional. This is the way I want you to be with your exercise goals. Intentional. Be specific, focus. Number 4 is know the goal. I keep talking about it, and it's okay. You don't have to apologize if you don't enjoy what I enjoy. I go to the gym 6 times a week because I like it, because that's what I enjoy doing. Those are my goals. So find out what you are capable of. Now, I will say, we can't just say, I don't like exercise, so I'm not going to do it. Well, you could, but understand the long-term consequences of that. As a woman over 40, 50, 60, and beyond, you must incorporate strength training if you want quality of life. It's just a non-negotiable. And it's not something that we get a pass on. We can get away with it for a while, but boy, when you get into your 50s, things begin to change. So keep that in mind. Set the goal, set the bar wherever you need. If the bar of entry is to go a couple of times a week or to work out from home for 20 minutes with your bands and a few dumbbells, set the bar there. And then 5 is know this rating of perceived exertion. Know it for weightlifting. It will help you. For a lot of your sets, it's going to be, I could do 2 or 3 more. And that's where you're going to end your set. So once again, I do hope that this gave you some perspective. And as always, I would love to hear from you. I am on Instagram at Carol Covino Fitness. I am on YouTube. If you enjoy watching as opposed to listening, this video is uploaded, the podcast that is, each and every week on my YouTube channel, which is at Carol Covino Fitness. Please do check that out. Like and follow the podcast. Very important. And I would love it if you have time for review. I go back periodically and read these. They are awesome. They make me feel so good, especially the positive ones. Of course, actually, that's all I've gotten is the positive, which is wonderful. But I would love your reviews. I would love to hear from you. You can message me on Instagram if anything resonated with you. I'm very, very approachable there, so please do reach out. There'll be a couple of links in the show notes. I have a free resource, a recipe guide. That link will be there. It's a hormone healthy recipe guide. So important to be taking in nutrition that supports your hormones. You can sign up for that. There is also a link to learn more about my Fit and Fierce program and to schedule a call with me to see if this program, we have just launched our January program, but this will be for pre-signups in the spring. So you can go ahead, check that out. It is a no obligation call. Filling out the application does not obligate you to anything at all. It is simply for you to see if this is a good fit. And then I need the call because I really want to find out if I can help you, if what I'm offering is going to be helpful for you, and if we're a good fit for one another. So check out those links, that free resource, and wherever you are in the world, I wish you every blessing. Boy, 2023, we're just roaring right through. I wish you every blessing. Bye for now.